Welcome in, everyone, to Girl, How'd You Get That Gig? For my partner, Celeste Gehring. I'm Amy G, and our listeners are going to be very excited to hear from this Emmy-winning sports correspondent and sports writer, Miss Kavitha Davison. Here's just a few places she's worked: HBO Real Sports, The Athletic, The Lead, ESPNW, and ESPN The Magazine. And we're going to throw Bloomberg in there. She's an author, and she also serves on the board of directors of the Yogi Berra Museum. Kavitha, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
Let's get into your career, which is what this podcast is all about, and your path and how you got to be doing what you're doing today. So I loved your Instagram bio. It says that you like to watch sports and eat frittatas. So I told Liz, I'm like, I'm going to like this girl for sure. But how did your connection with sports begin?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I was a kid growing up in New York in the 90s, and obviously the Yankees had this incredible dynasty, and the Knicks had a really, great run to the finals in 94 and then 99. And there's something about, I think that people from every city can say this, and I've often been accused of, rightfully so, being a New York supremacist, but I can only speak from the perspective of being a New Yorker, right?
Experience, yeah.
And the electricity of the city when the teams are doing well, and in particular the Knicks, but obviously also the Yankees and down the line, it just hits different. And these teams, I think also because we're an older city and our teams tend to be older, we've got an original six hockey team, for example, right? Like, I think it speaks to the roots of our city and of where we're from. And, I didn't grow up with a lot of money. So, and my parents are immigrants from India. They came to the States, to New York in 1981 before I was born. So they didn't really grow up with professional sports or commodified sports in the way that we have here. But my mom really fell in love with Bernard King in the early to mid 80s and loved the Knicks. And I think we still have the VHS of Patrick Ewing being drafted. And really loved the Knicks. My dad doesn't really care about sports too much, which is interesting, and I think can probably inform you about how, as a woman in the industry, I've approached fandom. But so I had never been to a live sporting event of any kind until I had a class trip. I think it was first or second grade. You know what? It was 96. It was the home opener in 96 against the Kansas City Royals, and it was snowing that day. And it was also Andy Pettitte bobblehead day, and I still have that bobblehead. And this was Yankee Stadium 2, right? So not the first one, and not the current one. And old Yankee Stadium had these acoustics where you felt the sound rising down from your throat into the pit of your stomach. It was this very physical and visceral sound and feeling. And I'd never experienced anything like that. And, I remember walking into the stadium for the first time with my class, all of whom had been mostly to a baseball game before. And it was also, the way that it was set up was every step you took further into the stadium before they took your tickets, you got another inch of the view of the field. And it's this very beautiful visual memory I have of every time I entered that building. So I fell in love with the feeling of being in that building. I fell in love with the community and the sound. And it was so very New York, where we were in the South Bronx, and there were people from all backgrounds speaking all languages, and I didn't understand the game at the time. But I tell people I've been kind of chasing that feeling ever since.
Yeah, there's an electricity that you feel physically in your body. I have one really quick Yankee Stadium story, Celeste.
Yeah.
So Paul and we got married in 2001. He also plays the trumpet, so I feel like you guys would really get along. And so we were dating because he was working at Sports Illustrated back in New York and I was in California. I think we were dating, and we went to a wedding back there. And part of the 3-day extravaganza was to go to a Yankee game. And I hadn't been to the state. Maybe I had once before. So we sit in the bleachers. And
do you remember around what time of the year it was?
Yeah. Well, it was summer.
Okay.
So baseball season, but I feel like it was towards the end of summer, maybe September. And I want to say it was 1999 or 2000.
Okay. So I thought you said 01. That's why I was asking if it was before or after 9/11, basically. So
before,
okay.
For sure. And you'll see why.
Okay.
So someone in the bleachers starts throwing a beach ball around, and I'm like, hey, California girl, even though they only do that at Dodger Stadium, and I do not like the Dodgers, but I recognized, the tradition, and I was like, right on over here, So it comes over. I am not kidding you guys. This New Yorker, it comes to me, and I'm like, okay, I got it. Reaches over me, grabs the ball, and he stabbed it with a pocket knife. And I can't exactly say what he said because my mom's listening, but it was like, we don't do that in New York, and I was like, oh my God. And Paul's like, I'm surprised he even married me. He's like, oh my God. Oh my God. Cause I was like, right here, over there, So that was
I will say,
no joke, a knife.
The bleacher creatures of yore were hardcore for sure.
Definitely before 9/11.
Well, yes, well, absolutely. That's funny. My equivalent of that, which is far less violent, is I won't abide the wave at Yankee Stadium. That shit is not something that we do. No, I mean, in general, right? Like Noah Syndergaard and I are 100% on the same page when it comes to this. So
I love that. I love that. And I do kind of feel, because Giants fans originated in New York, there is a very similar vibe to what they'll put up with and just how hardcore they are. They also, we grew up going to Candlestick, which is as cold as New York in the winter. At one game, you just go to one game and you're like, oh no, this is bad. So there's a camaraderie, I think, between the fans and an understanding. But I went full California blonde mode, and I was like, oh no, not. It was not a good move.
Who were the Yankees playing? Do you remember?
Oh, I have no idea.
Okay.
I think I have PTSD from that game.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Paul would know. He probably has the ticket. But yeah, no, it was like, just a random outing for the wedding party to go over there. So, but it's memorable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Amy, that was a pretty good New York accent you got going on there. I think we need to practice that in future episodes.
I'm very good at that.
All right. Kavitha, you attended Columbia University and you were the sports editor of the Columbia Daily Spectator. What inspired you? You had this love of the game. We went to Yankee Stadium, all of that. But what inspired you to actually pursue a career in journalism?
Yeah, I would say in high school, I just kind of wanted to work for the Yankees, right? Like I wanted, that's just kind of, it was that I wanted to be the first female GM of the Yankees. But I went to a very intense math and science high school called Stuyvesant, where every kid was. Most kids were immigrants. A lot of kids were on the free lunch program. I think more than half of our student body falls under the poverty line. So we're all, like, a lot of us go into STEM fields, right? So it's a math and science high school. And my mom's a scientist and a neuropathologist, and that was the move. I was very good at those things. And then I had a teacher sophomore year an English teacher who recognized that I was a really talented writer, and that wasn't something that I knew I had a talent for, and it was also not something that I knew I enjoyed to do. But him recognizing that, and he was also known for being the hardest grader in the school. He was also the hottest teacher. And I've gone back to speak at the high school since. They've invited me back, and I'm thinking about it, and I was like, man, he was probably 23.
Yeah, those first jobs that they get, they're young.
Yeah, but anyway, the fact that he was the hardest grader, and he was a snarky 23-year-old asshole, so he would just underline something on your term paper and just write awk,
awkward.
Yeah. So the fact that I did really well in his class, and ended up taking another AP class with him after that. But anyway, so he fostered this love of writing in general for me. So I joined my high school paper covering arts and culture and things like that. And I didn't actually write sports then, but that was really when I think junior or senior year of high school, I was like, no, I want to be a sports writer. I want to pursue journalism. I think it was also my political awakening probably came right after the 2000 election, and I started high school in 2002. So the importance of journalism to, society and to our democracy, even in something as sports. And honestly, I when I was applying for colleges in high school, I wasn't trying to be this investigative or impactful sports writer. I wanted to be the beat writer for the Yankees, right? But when I got to college, between my freshman and sophomore years, I had petitioned to take a graduate school class. And it was called The Socio-Historical Foundations of American Sport. And it was about how sports throughout our history have always intersected with culture, with innovation, with what's happening in the economy, with what's happening with race and gender. Like there's always been that, from since the founding of the country and since the development of leisure time in sports. And that was the first time I ever thought about sports in an academic and intellectual way, and about more than just about sports. And thinking about it, like my visceral feeling and connection, and I explored this a lot when Jessica Luther and I were writing our book, really do have to do with sports as more than just sports, and sports as culture and identity, and my, view of myself as a New Yorker and my roots in the city and things like that. So that really changed the way that I viewed sports. And I think that class has really helped shape my coverage and my approach to, using sports as a lens to cover serious issues, broader issues, and other issues in society.
It's such a platform, and that's what I've realized through my years in covering sports, and that, the day-to-day grind is what it is, but there's so many ways you can reach people because of sports, and it connects so many people of different backgrounds, different genders. And I'm going to go off the beaten path a little bit from what we had scripted for you, because I really want to know, with your mom being a scientist and your parents coming from India, there are always different cultural expectations. Every ethnicity has them and culture has them. So how did they take you? Maybe, I don't want to assume here, but it feels like
no, they didn't take it well. That's fine. They didn't take it well.
The norm, right? And I would guess with going to that school, that science was probably the path your parents thought you were going to take. What can you share about the juxtaposition you were in with that?
Yeah, I think that, so first of all, they are very supportive and very proud of me now, but it absolutely took them a long time to get to that place. And because, listen, like, not coming from a lot of money, right? Journalism isn't the most stable path from an income perspective, from a job security perspective. Like, none of us got into this for the money, guys.
To that.
Yeah,
right.
Yep. Amen.
Like, some of us are lucky to make quite a good living at it, but none of us got into it for that purpose. So,
no.
But yeah, I will also say that I have a sister who's 11 years older than I am, who, she was never really math and science inclined, but she did go to the same high school that I did. And she majored in college in like gender studies and creative writing. So my parent, I think her first year of her freshman year, her first day of her freshman year of college, she brought home like a brochure for a writer's workshop. And so my parents had at least 10 years to try and get used to get used to me.
She helped. Yeah.
She absolutely helped.
Yeah.
But but it had been a struggle for many years about that, for sure. And even when I started to make it professionally, like my parents were very proud when I got my Bloomberg job and a Bloomberg salary, frankly. But and it was also, it was an outlet that they respected, that they knew they could describe, they could tell it to their friends and they would know where I worked and that kind of thing. But they still didn't really quite understand what I did. And I think that they still don't quite, a lot of people don't quite understand what we do as journalists, right? They do recognize now that it's important. They read everything that I write and they watch everything that I put out there. But, it definitely took a while for them to warm up to the idea. And it wasn't because, they didn't think it was important, it was, elite or important or anything like that. It's because they were worried about stability, which I understand, from a parent's perspective. But, somehow I'll keep forging my own path instead of, these careers where you have a set 3 to 5% raise every year. That must be nice.
I'll share a really quick story that you can probably relate to. So I'm a lot older than you, and I graduated from UC Davis in 1995, and I wanted to work in television in hard news. That was kind of the path that I wanted to take. And it took me a couple of years to get there. Around 25, I got offered a morning assistant producer job back near home. I'm in Northern California. I was in LA. And I went home for the interview and stayed with my parents. And my mom's like, "Oh my God, this is so exciting. I'm so excited. You're going to get it. You're going to get it." And my dad's like, well, let's make sure she gets it. So I get the job offer. It's part-time, 5 hours a day for $8 an hour. And I come home, I go, I got the job. And I was like, oh, tell them what it is. And I just remember my dad, who had just at that time dropped $40,000 for me to go to UC Davis, right? And my parents are super young. That was a ton of money for them. And he just goes, it was like he couldn't speak. He could not speak. And my mom's like, this is going to be great. It's going to be great. And my dad was like, how are you going to survive? Like $8 an hour. I'm like, I don't know. I'll figure it out.
And like in those 5 hours a day, they probably expected you to do 30 hours worth of work, right?
100%. And I'll tell you, you move up the ranks very quickly in news when you start on a morning show, because nobody wants to do it. I had to be there at 2:30 in the morning. And in 2 months, I got promoted to producer and I got a raise to $10 an hour. And I was like, I'm rolling in it. But the parental side of this is probably one of the most insecure occupations you could ever have. And as you're saying, Kavitha, like, which kind of leads us to that next question of like, how do you explain what you do? Because you do so many different things, which is awesome. But
thank you.
If somebody says, what do you do for a living? How do you answer that question?
Yeah. And honestly, the answer to that question has changed depending on where I've worked and what I've been doing. Currently, I'm a correspondent on Real Sports, and it's an honor to have been on the show. And I'm very sad that our show is ending at the end of this year.
My favorite show.
Mine too.
An institution. We've been on for 29 years, 37 Emmys, a Peabody, just impactful journalism. And Brian and we're taping this, I know, before you're dropping this, our farewell to the show party is actually tomorrow. So Bryant is one of those giants in the industry who really changed what people thought sports journalism could accomplish. Mm-hmm. And when I was growing up and I watched shows like this, I watched this show, I watched Outside the Lines, and I watched The Sports Reporters with John Saunders. Mm-hmm. And I dreamed of being on those shows, and unfortunately John passed away before I joined ESPN, but I did get to do Outside the Lines quite a bit, and now I'm on Real Sports, so I'm very lucky in that sense. But so the way I describe what I do, and I will also say that in general, and this is my soapbox, we need to teach media literacy in this country because nobody understands what journalists do, and how they do it, and that's part of the reason that there's so much distrust. But anyway, the way that I currently describe it is, I'm an investigative journalist. I cover, the intersection of sports and business and policy a lot, race, gender, culture, corruption, a lot of kind of the not fun stuff. And the way that I say it is I love sports and I don't get to ever cover the fun stuff in sports. But the stuff that becomes hard news, like Brittany Griner being held in Russia, those tend to be the stories that I gravitate to and that I'm more known for. And I think, like my sister's not a sports fan. What I often say is I don't think you need to be a sports fan to care about or be interested in the coverage that I do, because there are, sports are multi-billion-dollar industry. They should be covered like every other business is. And they are also such a huge, as you said, Amy, cultural force that unify, but also can be used to divide us. Right. So that's, it usually takes a while to actually explain what I do.
But yeah, I was just gonna say, when you mentioned Bryant Gumbel, like talking about the layers he brings to sports, but to journalism as well. But
he's the blueprint. I mean, he's the, and we've seen this over the years where sports journalists cross over into hard news, and it happens the other way around as well, because there is, depending on the kind of coverage you've done, there is just so much overlap. It's the same skill set. It's the same foundations when you're doing it right, and he was kind of one of the first people to do that and to recognize that.
He's awesome. I love him.
Exactly. With all the stories and the interviews you've done, which ones have impacted you the most and stayed with you?
Yeah, the obvious answers are the ones that have won awards, which is an obnoxious thing for me to say, but
Oh, it's not because you won a ton of awards. We'll brag for you.
Oh, thank you. So the piece that I did that was nominated for an Emmy at Real Sports, it was only my second piece there, was about the team doctor at the University of Michigan, not Michigan State, which was Larry Nassar with USA Gymnastics and Michigan State, but the team doctor, Robert Anderson at the University of Michigan, who, similar story, over the course of 40 years, assaulted over 1,000 victims have come forward so far. And the thing that made this unique was he was the team doctor for mostly the football team and other teams as well. But that means that the majority of his victims were men, and the majority of his victims were Black men. And we don't talk about men being sexually assaulted, and we don't talk about Black men being sexually assaulted. So I interviewed 3 survivors, and all of them have actually had some form of relationship with Larry Nassar's victims also. And it was really interesting. One of them came to set to walk through, one of the players that I interviewed through. And it's been interesting to see that, that camaraderie and, that community come together. So that story meant a lot. I won't say it's because of the reporting, but after the piece came out, there had already been a class action lawsuit. And I believe, I can't remember the exact number, but the settlement was over $500 million. And it was the largest sexual assault class action settlement in the history of the United States. So I'm proud to have had some hand in covering that. Again, I won't take credit for the settlement itself, and I'm also a sexual assault survivor myself. And I have, been very upfront about that because it took me a long time to be able to say that, frankly, in public. But also, so much of my coverage, unfortunately, has been about gendered violence in sports, and being able to bring that experience and also that empathy and having survivors be comfortable talking to me because of it, and hopefully, I think, maintain objectivity as much as possible. But so that's been, a particularly impactful corner of my coverage. The other piece that I'll bring up that won an Edward R. Murrow Award when I was co-hosting The Lead, it was just this really beautiful story about a young boy in Baltimore named Mo Gaba, who was kind of known for being this super fan of Baltimore teams. And he was a very young boy. He had a terminal illness, but he would just call into his radio stations, and they got to know him and they got to know Mo, and he just became known as the super fan. He got to meet his players, and the last interview, the last time he called in, they basically gave him a whole show. I think that they kind of knew that he didn't have very much time left with us. And it was very emotional and it was very long. And they had Baltimore greats from around the years call in and talk to him. And he passed away, and we were able to do that story and use some of those recordings and use his voice. And we interviewed his mother. And that's a story that, we had to pause while we were doing those interviews quite a few times because all of us were crying.
I bet.
So that, that's one. And then, there've been some business stories that, I covered, the use of migrant slave labor to build the World Cup stadiums in Qatar, which angered a lot of people. I've received death threats for covering Penn State and Jerry Sandusky. And oddly, horse owners are crazy. I would just like to say,
just for the record, horse owners are crazy.
So yeah, the coverage has really spanned a pretty wide gamut there. The last piece that I did for Real Sports, which just personally meant a lot to me, my family is from India, is I went to India for a couple of weeks. And we covered this soccer academy in a very tribal, very rural part of northern India. And it's nowhere near where my family's from. I'd never been anywhere near that area. But it's the type of place that is extremely poor. And again, it's mostly farmland. And the girls there are sold basically into child marriage at a very young age. And, they're forced to work the land. They're not expected to go to school. Most of them are sexually abused, probably by a family member before they turn 5. And this American and his now wife started a soccer academy, and it started just about soccer and helping these girls have a safe space to just play a game. They had an interest in it. They saw the boys being able to play. But now there's also a school attached to it that has 99, I believe, students in it now. And it's really remarkable. Again, these are girls who are not expected to go to high school, and they're taught everything. They're taught English, which is super important, especially in that part of India. And a lot of them go on to go to college in very metropolitan cities in India or abroad. And one of them, incredibly, is at Harvard. So that was a story. These girls look like me, and they took to me. I have an Indian name. It was a really personally important story for me to be able to do, and I'm happy that will be my last piece at Real Sports.
I mean, you are just fascinating. You are fascinating, and there's so many things I want to ask, but I really want to get into your background, being Indian, being female. But with all of the things you just mentioned that you covered, there's so much disappointment when you get into the nitty gritty of any organization, right? But what's so harmful when you get into it with sports, and they always say, be careful about meeting your heroes or your sports heroes, right? Is the purity you have as a child being a fan, and then pulling that curtain back and seeing how the organization really works, right? We've all been privy to seeing some things we weren't happy about seeing. How do you maintain your love of the game when you see what you see?
Yeah, I get asked that a lot. I'm sure you do too. I think in any capacity, being a woman in this industry, being a person of color, just like, being a gay even just being a male ally, right? Like a white dude who's just a good person, right? Like you're still going to
They're
see,
out there.
they absolutely are.
Yeah.
And it's funny because, as I mentioned earlier, like when I was little, I wanted to be the GM of the Yankees, right? When I was in college, I did an internship with the Staten Island Yankees. And that was when I basically, and they was no corruption or anything, but I just saw how the sausage was made, right? And I was like, I can't work at a front office. I will end up being so disillusioned with this team, with sports, if that were the case, that let me work on the other side of things and try to make things better. So the way that I maintain that feeling is that, first of all, I do remember what that feeling is, right? And I do get it. American football is probably my least favorite sport now, because I know so much about not just the safety of the game, but frankly, the league itself and a lot of the people who work there. And there are very good people who do work there, but a lot of the things that happen behind the scenes, and still, when the New York Giants are on, I've got Plaxico behind me, right? Like it's still game over, right? Like it still kind of overtakes you. Now, I will say that I think when you work in sports, especially in the capacity that I do, there is no such thing as being able to watch a game purely for pleasure anymore. Even if I'm at a game in my jersey, all of that, because the analytical side of you still is on just a little bit, right? You're still thinking about what this means in the context of the season, or in the context of what this team has done, and all that kind of thing. So that's not there. But I will also say I'm very lucky that my job involves this, right? Like I wouldn't have it any other way. And Amy, what you're talking about with, the purity of being a fan, that was kind of the basis of the introduction chapter to the book Jessica and I wrote, which is about the moral and ethical dilemmas of sports fandom and how various people do or do not maintain their fandom despite them. And so we interviewed a sports psychologist who basically, and I asked her, why do sports matter so much to us? Why does it feel so deeply rooted in you? Like, and then when you challenge them, and I get, as I said, death threats and comments from fans all the time. Why is there such a backlash? Why does it create such a disproportionate reaction, and often violent? Absolutely. And she said, if you think about when your sports fandom is formulated, it's formulated usually earlier than other types of fandom, music and art, like all that kind of thing. But it's also usually extremely rooted in not just your identity and your conception of yourself, but in your identity of your roots. So grandpa took me to my first game, or in my case, the city that I'm born and raised in, or, there's something there that goes back generationally, even if that's not where your immediate fandom started. And that's why it feels like when somebody is challenging your team, they are challenging you as an individual, and they are challenging something that is innate about you, even if that's not the case. And that's why they matter so much to us, and they probably matter too much to some of us. But that's why they're both beautiful and ugly at times. And that's the inherent contradiction. We're a world built on contradictions. We just have to kind of sit with that.
Yes. The book, by the way, is called Loving Sports When They Don't Love You Back. And I think it was named, I don't think it was named one of the best books to give by the New York Times back in 2020. This episode drops December 19th. So hello, holiday gift. Let's go.
Yes, please.
I love it. I love all of this. So I could talk to you forever.
I know. How have you seen the sports industry change regarding diversity since you started? Like, how have you seen that through your lens?
Well, so I got my Bloomberg job in 2013. So 10 years, I think December will be 10 years of me doing this full time professionally. I've absolutely seen things get better. I think that I started to see things get better very gradually when I first started out. But obviously after Me Too and after George Floyd, there has been a concerted push to make sure things get better, right? And I think it's obviously a good thing that we have that impetus and we have that effort. I think that it's, the jury's still a little bit out about how sincere some of those efforts really are. And that's not just about sports, and that's not just about journalism. You talk to anybody in any industry, in any company, they'll say we have to do some DAI stuff, and we don't know if it's lip service or not, right? But it sometimes does feel like checking a box. I think that we're having better conversations now about what true diversity in newsrooms actually means. It doesn't mean that 50% of your newsroom is women. It doesn't mean that 50% of your newsroom are people of color. It means, because if most of those people have entry-level positions, they don't have any real power, and they're not shaping coverage, and they're not shaping the way that interviews are conducted, or who is being interviewed and whose voices are being featured and elevated. So it's who has actual editorial control, who is being hired to be senior editors and editors in chief and executive producers and things like that. And that all matters. And I think that the conversation has gotten a lot more nuanced when it comes to that. I think that, frankly, we started seeing this on the ground in New York, and I think this is spread across the country, where there have been Google Docs going around where you can anonymously or otherwise put in what you do in journalism, what your role is, how many years you've been doing it, and what your salary is. And I think, especially as women, we don't talk about money enough, and we're taught that it's
Amen.
It's
Amen.
And we have to be not uncomfortable about it. Like if we're
embarrassed. It's because we're embarrassed at what we get paid.
We're embarrassed at what we get paid, and it's on both sides. We're embarrassed if we're underpaid, and we're embarrassed if we think we get paid too much.
Right.
And I have friends across the industry, and we've got salary ranges that vary wildly. Incredible. And it's really important to have those conversations. So I think that I think that there has been progress, but also progress isn't linear. And whenever there's a movement like Me Too or a movement like Black Lives Matter, there's always a really disproportionate backlash to it. Like the pendulum kind of swings too far in either direction. And I think that we see that a lot. I think we see that, we've seen that in the last few years, especially in the political sphere. But it is getting better. And I think one of the encouraging things, especially, hasn't just been the diversity in hiring, but that a lot of women and people of color have come out to talk directly about the harassment and abuse that they've faced in the workplace. I'm very lucky to say that I've never been sexually harassed by somebody that I worked for, right? Shit happens, right? Like, but we had this sprawling Washington Post report from a couple of years ago, where a bunch of NFL reporters and women who worked in league and team offices talked about their harassment. One of my great friends and colleagues, Rhiannon Walker, who's at The Athletic, was one of those women who came forward. And so I think the fact that people have at least felt comfortable and felt safer being able to tell those stories does indicate that we've made a lot of progress. But there is still clearly a long way to go. And as media keeps shrinking, I think we continue to see people in charge be afraid of going outside what they know to work. And what they know to work, frankly, is catering to white, usually conservative men in their 40s and 50s. Mm-hmm. But what we are also seeing is every league, including the NFL, which we all, including me, used to think was infallible, are starting to struggle with ratings. And it's because young people and young kids, and Amy, I know you've got a 15-year-old, they don't watch sports they don't watch anything at the same clip that they used to, but they don't watch sports at the same clip that they used to, right? And they're not watching it in the same distribution channels and the same mediums and all of that. So everyone has to figure out how they're going to build the next generation of fans, which is not going to be a white man in his 40s. It is, we are going to be a majority minority country in 20 years. And the way that, 13 to 18-year-olds think about entertainment and media is not the way that I did growing up. And it's not the way that people do now. So we do have to, I think capitalism and the dollar will force that progress to come, even if there's a little bit of inertia at the top that still exists.
It's so true. I mean, progress is so slow in any time of our history, progress is slow. But, speaking of my children, they're mixed, they're, Mexican and white. And the attention span is not there to sit and watch any type of sporting event as we used to. What is a commercial? No, so you have that, but then you also have really what I'm most proud about regarding my children, and I feel like I can say this for this generation, is they have no tolerance if you're not inclusive. When pronouns and different sexual genders are mentioned, they're not fazed in the slightest. They do not care. Are you a good person? That is, and I know I'm their mom and I probably seem biased, but it's just they're unfazed by stuff that was not spoken of in my generation. And so I'm always kind of trying to learn, like, what's cis and what's bi and what's, all the things I'm trying to learn. And they're wonderful teachers for me and Paul. And I do feel like I did my part in having mixed kids. And, it's a better place when we work together. And
I think it's absolutely true. And listen, there are a few things, especially about media consumption, that I can be old man yells at cloud about. But one of them that I will never
old man, not just
80.
But one of them that, I mean, and you're absolutely right. I make this point all the time. I just did a panel for Beyond Sport a couple weeks ago. This generation cares about social justice. Now, their definition of social justice might not be the same as the next person's, but they care about it. They're not afraid of it. And they in particular want their brands and the companies that they give their money to care about it too, or at least pretend to, right? Absolutely. And we've seen polls after poll, especially after Black Lives Matter and George Floyd, that prove that and that bear that out. And I think that's the kids really are the future.
Well, talking about having a space for everybody, what advice would you give for people that are trying to break into the sports industry?
Yeah, I mean, this is hard. First, I mean, the very practical advice is just do everything, honestly, like learn how to cut tape and learn how to cut audio and all of that. Like, I've been on camera and I don't know how to cut tape, and I wish I did, like that kind of thing. Try lots of different parts of the industry also, because there are so many different types of jobs that you can have. And as I said, the industry is ever shrinking. So just having a lot of bows in your arsenal is a good thing. And then for the breaking in thing, look, I took a very non-traditional path in here. I didn't graduate college. I was assaulted and did an inpatient program, like all of that. Right. And I kind of had to really prove myself by doing a lot of work for free to get there. And I don't recommend or think that young people should have to do that. And I think that's another conversation that they're frankly, I'm grateful that they're having, where, you know, if you have to write a bunch of columns for a job interview, you should be paid for that work. Like that's how that works.
Absolutely.
I will also, but given all of that, so that kind of speaks to like knowing your worth, not allowing yourself to be exploited. I know that that's really easier said than done. And there's a reason that a lot of journalists come from privileged backgrounds because they can afford to take the unpaid internship or, do the work for free when they're asked to and all of that. But I do think that that's changing and hopefully it will change. But so while not being exploited and knowing your worth is really important, I will also say, not limiting yourself to what you think you should or are capable of applying for or doing. Very quickly, I'll tell you about how I got my Real Sports job. Is after I left ESPN, it took me much longer than I thought it would for me to find my next outlet. And I was really having this kind of identity crisis. You know, what I do is so much a part of who I am, and it's not particularly healthy, but it's what it is. And I started applying for jobs outside of sports, but in journalism, and then jobs outside of journalism, but in sports. Right. And just trying to figure out, who am I if I'm not this person who has done this for as long as I have? And there was a PA listing for Real Sports, and a production assistant listing for Real Sports. And I was like, I've always wanted to work on this show. I respect the journalism they do so much. It's less money than I've been making, but it's more money than nothing. And so I applied for it. And also, if I, could learn how to cut tape, because that was one of the things that you would be doing in that role. And also just to be able to be part of a show like this in any capacity. Right. So I went in and I met with the executive producer and the director, and they just looked at me and they looked at my resume and they were like, why would you want to do this job? You're a little overqualified. Yeah. And I said it, and I said it genuinely. Like, it can sound like bullshit in the context of a job interview, but I said, look, like, I don't think I'm above any work, frankly. I don't have these skills. Like, I don't know how to cut tape, and I think that would be super useful. And I respect the show and what the show does. And I can't say that about a lot of shows that are still around. So, so they were like, well, okay, well, we think you're wrong for this. Like, we need someone who's going to cut tape and run coffee and do. And I'm like, but I will do all those things. I was an executive assistant at one point. And they were like, no, I'm like, but they were like, my director, Tim, he said, I'll always remember this. He said to me, I don't know what it is, but I've been doing this for a very long time. And you have it. Like, you are a journalist who is good on camera, talking about serious shit, but also sports. Right. And he was like, well, we don't have headcount right now, but I think we need to try you out in a correspondent role in some way, in some capacity. It took a couple of years for that to happen. Frankly, that was like, I want to say early 2019. And then I joined The Athletic, but also HBO's. I mean, there have been a couple of acquisitions and corporate restructurings and things like that. But when it happened, and it was because I applied for a PA position. So
not on their radar.
Yeah. So that's all of that. All of that is advice that I would give, and that I do give young people today. And also have something in your back pocket, because I don't know where this industry is going.
So true.
I mean, barista. It's
we're
gonna go anywhere.
Thank you so much for your time. We are so inspired by you, just the realness of you, the authenticness of you, really living your purpose and inspiring so many people. Thank you so much for being generous with your time today.
Well, thank you both so much for having me, and I hope we can stay in touch. And this was a great conversation.
I hope so too. That's what I was thinking. I'm like, I went way over on time, but I don't want to let her go. I feel like we're friends now. And
if you're ever in New York, and I'm actually in the Bay Area quite a bit.
Okay.
Because one of my best friends lived there. I actually just got back. So, okay. I just got back from Napa last week. So
I saw that on your Instagram. And I'm like, I wish, because I'm 25 minutes from Napa, and I'm like, oh man, I wish I would. You were wine tasting. I just stalked you a little bit.
That's okay.
Okay. I was actually doing research. I was researching.
No, absolutely.
Kavitha Davison. Wow, you're it. You have it. Keep going, girl.
You've been listening to Girl, How'd You Get That Gig with hosts Amy G and Celeste Gehring. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on YouTube and follow us on Instagram. The handle is @GirlGigPodcast. Followers and subscribers are automatically entered to win our giveaway prizes, announced every other Wednesday on our Instagram page. Until our next episode, go get that gig.